Well, welcome. I know that the topic that I was asked to present on was about anti-racist teaching, and I do want to make a small shift. And I'm going to just say that I'm really going to be talking about anti-racist teaching, but also abolitionist teaching, and how do we support the development of racial justice orientations with our teacher candidates. Great. So we're going to start with a little poll. When you hear the word anti-racist teaching, what comes to your mind? We'll take another 45 seconds or so to enter any words or phrases that come to mind to define or describe anti-racist teaching. Ooh, intentional and equity have gotten multiple entries. Great, we'll take 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to ask folks to kindly finish your responses so that it stops moving. I'm sure there's a way I could pause it. I am not super proficient at this particular platform. I just thought I would try it out since we're all moving to remote, or we've been in remote instruction, crisis learning. So if you can finish up so it can, because it'll keep moving otherwise. And then I'll just ask for a couple people to volunteer something that stands out to you from our word cloud.
Change.
Other words that stand out to you?
Intentional.
Thank you.
Proactive, active.
Humanizing.
Responsive.
Listening.
Equity.
Thank you.
Subtle.
Thank you. Yeah, these are really great words and definitions. And I really appreciate how a lot of folks put in words in here that are actually, really affirmative. I think sometimes when we think about anti-racist teaching, we're thinking about what are the ways that we dismantle racism, what are the ways that we dismantle white supremacy, and those are very important things. And then also thinking of the reason I had kind of made that shift to thinking about what does abolitionist teacher education look like is trying to think about, okay, so if we're anti-racist, what are we promoting? What are we trying to do with our work? And so, I don't know how to shift the screen now. And so, let's see, it reminds me of this quote from Gloria Anzaldúa from Borderlands, where she says, "It is not enough to stand on the opposite riverbank shouting questions, challenging patriarchal white conventions. A counterstance locks one into a duel of oppressor and oppressed, locked in mortal combat. Because the counterstance stems from a problem with authority, outer as well as inner. It's a step towards liberation from the cultural domination, but it is not a way of life. At some point on our way to new consciousness, we will have to leave the opposite bank, the split between the two mortal combatants somehow healed so that we are on both shores at once, and at once see through serpent and eagle eyes. The possibilities are numerous once we decide to act and not react." And so I do, of course, believe in anti-racist teaching, that really what we're doing is promoting racial literacies. What we're trying to do is dismantle white supremacy and anti-Blackness in our work. But also, I am trying to think about what are we standing for? So when we're not reacting to racism, what are we doing? And that really brought me to Bettina Love's work on abolitionist teaching. And I wanted to highlight a few things. I put in the Google Drive a chart that I just put some thinking and some reflective questions in. In the first chapter, she outlines sort of abolitionist teaching is, and there's sort of a lot of statements about what it is, and it's a very long document. Sorry for it being so long. But I thought I would just highlight a few of these. So choosing to engage in the struggle for educational justice, to refuse oppression and refuse to oppress others, mainly your students. And what this makes me think about is how are we developing our own capacities to see and refuse oppression in our teaching practices as teacher educators? And also, how do we support teachers in seeing the multiple ways that oppression manifests in their classrooms and schools and in their teaching practice? And what are the strategies that we're developing with our teacher candidates to refuse oppression? What does that even mean to refuse oppression through our teaching? Next, she talks about reimagining and rewriting curriculum. And so I've been thinking about how have I reimagined the curriculum of teacher education? Which authors and sources do I hold up as experts in teaching and learning? How often am I citing queer, trans, femme, Black, Indigenous, people of color sources? And how do I work with teacher candidates in the development of their curriculum? And how do I prepare them to justify their abolitionist curriculum? She also talks about knowing that freedom isn't possible without women and queer leaders. And so who are the women and queer, including trans and non-binary leaders whose work I'm striving to amplify and uplift? And if I'm not conscious of that, then who do I need to become more aware of, right? How am I becoming more aware of and making more visible the work of women and queer leaders, especially in the field of education and teacher education? Refusing to take part in zero tolerance policies and the school to prison pipeline, demanding restorative justice as the only approach to improving school culture. So what am I teaching about school and classroom discipline theories and practices? How am I teaching and incorporating principles and practices of restorative justice and transformative justice? And I think for us, thinking about when moments of tension do occur, how do I address them using restorative and transformative justice approaches? Often, I think in higher ed, we talk about those practices and we're not necessarily super great at implementing them, or at least I know I've been challenging myself to do that in a better way. Who are the teachers who get pushed out of our programs? Are teacher candidates of particular and marginalized identities pushed out more often than others? And if so, how can we take a restorative, transformative justice approach to addressing this issue? Calling out other teachers who diminish dark children and who do not think dark children matter. So are we aware of the anti-Blackness in ourselves and our colleagues? And how do we go about calling it out when we see it? Are we aware of the anti-Blackness in our teacher candidates, and how do we go about calling that out? And then what decisions are we making and how are we making them about who we recruit and retain in our programs? She talks about acknowledging and accepting that America and its policies are anti-Black, racist, discriminatory, and unjust. So how do we learn about and meaningfully acknowledge the historical legacy of anti-Blackness, racism, and discrimination in our institutions of higher education? Do we even know what those narratives are? How do we support teacher candidates in grappling with the dissonance they experience related to the legacy of racism and anti-Blackness in education and their roles as teachers within that system? And then the last one that I wanted to highlight was abandoning teaching gimmicks like grit that present the experiences of dark youth as ahistorical and further pathologize them. And so do we remain critical of the concepts such as grit, growth mindset, and even SEL that reproduce white supremacy and anti-Blackness? And how do we use our relative positional status to disrupt these conceptual frameworks? And how do we support teacher candidates to understand these complexities and speak back to them? So those are some of the things that I've been trying to reflect on using Bettina Love's book, and I thought I would offer those as a point of reflection for us. What I was hoping to do is to give us a small amount of time in breakout groups to just reflect and read over some of those components from the Google Doc, and then to share, is there something that's resonating with you? Is there something that you want to do in this next coming year to further promote anti-racist abolitionist teaching this year? So a couple of things that I thought I would also offer. And I'm sorry, also I didn't clarify that there are two documents in the Google folder. So one of them was kind of the list of components of abolitionist teaching as defined by Bettina Love, and then just some reflection questions that might be useful for us. And the second is just a list of kind of like resources and sources for folks. And so I just wanted to name that some of the things I'll be talking about in this part of the webinar refer to links that are in that second document that has all the has a lot of links and yeah. But so I did want to break down a few of the ways that I feel like in our teacher education program at UCLA that we're trying to move toward abolitionist teaching and unlearning our traditional notions of teaching. And I've kind of broken it up into what are we doing, like what are the self-work things that we're doing with ourselves and with our teaching candidates? What are we doing with guiding teacher selection, supporting the curriculum planning process, addressing oppressive language, and then some field-based reflective assignments. So a couple things. So when it comes to self-work, just thinking about what are the reflection questions that we ask teachers to reflect on. So for example, the ones that I put in the chart, I think really trying to make central to those reflection questions issues around equity and race and racism in our classrooms. One thing that I've had some success with, or something that's been helpful, is sending a summer reading list that explicitly names concepts such as white supremacy, fragility, transphobia, so that when students come into the program, we already have some common shared, their blog posts and not academic articles. Some of them are webinars, that kind of thing. I put a few of them in the Google Doc. But I think that has been helpful for kind of starting us off at a point where we're just naming that racial justice and dismantling white supremacy is just something that's something that we are intentionally working on. Also, in our program, we have a very consistent focus on positionality. So how do positionality being the ways that our identities are made sense of in the particular context in which we teach and live, and so that our positionalities shift, right, when we move context. And so as student teachers come into their student teaching placements and into those communities, and also into the role of student teacher, that their positionalities shift. And then that creates that sense of being, trying to be an insider, trying to integrate into that community, but also having some outsider status as well. Something that I've been working on is having coursework reading options. So when I have a syllabus, offering at least 2 choices about the same topic and asking teacher candidates to choose the reading that is best for their learning. And so often I'll try to present something. So for example, when we talk about settler colonialism, to present a reading that's just what is settler colonialism, right? The idea that we are all settlers on this land and what are the implications of that. And then another reading that maybe is a little bit more complex. And so asking students to choose. And so that's part of their reflection process and their growth. And then also explicitly naming that, that they may have some discomfort as they do this self-work. And that's okay, and that our goal isn't necessarily for their comfort, because what we want is for their learning. Okay, let's see. The next thing that I thought I could offer, sorry, I'm moving the little windows around, is just the importance of choosing guiding teachers. And I know that not all of us have that as part of our jobs, but I think really intentionally selecting and building community and capacity with the guiding teachers or the mentor teachers, developing relationships within schools and promoting a reciprocal relationship. And then I think something that's helped me to work with guiding teachers is to explicitly name our programmatic goals and the expectations of student teachers as enacting abolitionist curriculum and pedagogy. So when I go to meet with a prospective guiding teacher, telling them our teachers are expected to do racial justice work, and so they will be focusing on ways that systems of oppression play out in their curriculum, and really trying to dismantle that and to center narratives of communities of color. And part of that is also negotiating what is being taught, how it gets taught, and why it gets taught in those classrooms. And so being able to ask the guiding teachers things like, okay, what are the must-dos in your class? What are the units that really absolutely must be covered? And are there ways that that has to be covered? And if not, then can the student teachers, even if they have to teach a unit on Romeo and Juliet or something more traditional, that they could turn that around and present that curriculum in an abolitionist way. And then strategies for partnering guiding teachers with student teachers. I try to pay attention to race, gender, sexuality, and other identities. I even had to tell a white guiding teacher this last year that if I couldn't find a corresponding, so we place our student teachers in both a middle school and a high school placement, or at least my cohort does. And I had to tell him, oh, I haven't been able to find a teacher of color in the corresponding middle school that is willing to take student teachers. And so I'm going to keep working on that, but I'm just letting you know that that's an issue for me. And he was very understanding and very supportive, and in fact, actually helped get me connected to teachers of color who could be guiding teachers. And then just also honoring the work of the guiding teachers, that they are teacher educators, and they're partners in developing abolitionist teachers. And so really putting that out there so that they know that that's what I'm hoping that they'll also do, and just putting that at the forefront, that they're the teacher educators for our teacher candidates. And then thirdly, supporting the planning process. So how are we helping teacher candidates to develop curriculum that centers the knowledge, experience, expertise, and narratives of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and people who experience marginalization? And then how do we push past just sort of representation and a multicultural type of curriculum? And then how are the goals and objectives of their curriculum focused on strength, resilience, power, and joy, not just the struggles of people of color? And Bettina Love talks about this as centering Black joy and centering Black mattering, that Black people matter, and not just focusing on, the sort of typical like slavery narratives and that kind of thing. Essential questions are key, centering justice and racial justice. They need to be provocative and relevant. Obviously, people know these things. But one point I would like to make is just really trying to emphasize with our teacher candidates that they should avoid having students argue for the oppressor. So something like, should the slaves have been freed, or something like that. It's just not an argument that students need to be making, and that's really counter to developing their racial literacies. And so I just wanted to pose some examples. And in the Google Doc, there's a section that says something like links to Satori timeline projects. One of the projects that I have my students do is sort of a reimagining of the unit plan. And so you can see, for example, this is from Prentice Hall, the US history textbook, where the traditional questions are, what was manifest destiny? There is this question, what is the link between expansionism and slavery? And instead of teaching this unit, using some of those same resources to think about a history of Indigenous resistance in the Americas. And there's they create this curriculum and they put it on this Satori timeline. So I put the links to that. You can see what they created. Another example, so this is also from the Prentice Hall textbook around, so could the Union be saved without war? Was slavery the primary cause of civil war? Was slavery a benign or evil institution? So here again, like I wouldn't really ever ask students to argue that slavery was a benign institution. But so then the students created this unit from plantations to prisons, and their essential questions, right? How do systems of oppression evolve over time to maintain power and dominance? What does it mean to be free? And has the US reached its foundational ideas? So just some different examples. I'm gonna kind of skip through these, but I put some links to those in the Google Doc. And just also paying attention to their intentionality. I think when I'm doing field support, trying to ask the student teachers what data could be collected to help them to reflect on their goals. So if they're saying, for example, that they're really wanting to promote the participation of students who are emerging bilingual students or English learners, and then we might track participation, and then I'll write down the students who are participating, and then they'll be able to reflect on, did the practices that they implemented actually achieve that goal, their intentions that they set forth in the planning process. Also for addressing oppressive language, just thinking about this in two ways. So prevention and education versus interrupting and addressing. And just really remembering that we want them to, they're teachers. And so how do they teach students about the oppressive language? If students are, so before students use the N-word, maybe they would have already had a lesson on the N-word and the history of the N-word, instead of waiting to interrupt that language. But when it does happen, also having strategies for interrupting that. And so I think this is another way that we can promote students towards anti-racist abolitionist teaching. Right? So how do we help them to create or find those lessons? I have some examples of lessons that some of my students and infographics that they created this year. So challenging queer and trans exclusive language, and then practicing with pronouns. This is one on the history of the N-word. This is a lesson that they found on ableist language and how we might replace using non-ableist alternatives. And then this is, thank you, six steps for restorative conversations. Sorry, I'm trying to go real quick because we're just almost out of time. I'm so sorry. So also thinking about what are the field-based reflective analysis assignments that we can do with students. So having them look at data in their classrooms or in their schools, maybe around discipline or classroom management, participation, grades, and achievement, and just having them reflect on their practices and the practices of their schools, and to see, is oppression, well, we know that oppression is happening, but what are the ways that they can resist oppression, right? Like Bettina Love talked about in her book. And so this is just an example of an assignment that he did with students. I had them look at the school-wide discipline data. So this is one student's, this is actually his PowerPoint slide, that in his school, Black males were 14% of the student population, yet accounted for 82% of the referrals. And 6 of the top 10 most referred students are Black. And in his class, 12% of his students were Black males, yet they accounted for 90% of the referrals. I think this was very shocking to him because he was trying really hard to, have this very social justice oriented classroom. And his 5 most referred students were Black males. And so what we did was we came up with some strategies to have him develop some of his strategies for working with students who had been challenging to him before, and really thinking about ways that those students were not getting their needs met, and that's why this was happening. And so he did observations and interviews with experienced teachers who those students identified as engaging and good. He did some intentional developing of relationships with students outside the classroom. He joined in our district Students Run LA, the running club, and did some lunch activities. He met with the mental health team at the school, and then invited some of them to come and observe his class and give him feedback, and then did some co-construction of classroom norms and getting clarity of classroom norms and policies. This was his final reflection in his paper. I've been able to develop my critical lens for interpreting how the events and experiences in the classroom are not isolated events, rather they are microcosms of an unequal society, and schools are often spaces that reproduce those systems of power in which Black males are labeled as threats and defiant. I realize I must keep creating opportunities to deconstruct my own biases, prejudices, and preconceived notions. And so we have like only 5 minutes. So just, I wanted to offer some time back in those small groups. I don't know if we really have time for small groups, but what ideas do you have for implementing anti-racist abolitionist teacher education this year? What areas of learning and growth are you wanting to focus on? And what questions do you have?
Okay, in view of what you presented, I was thinking in writing, some of my student teachers will be dealing with heritage speakers, Spanish heritage speakers, and some of them say, oh, I don't speak the correct Spanish, or my family does not speak the correct Spanish. So I would like my student teacher to work on that, and as you use the term transformative, see that is what they speak is not incorrect. It may not be understood everywhere in the world. That's why they need to understand so-called academic Spanish, but doing in a transformative way and not in a punitive way.
Yeah, thank you.
Leona had a comment about role playing and modeling as a way to interrupt oppressive language.
But adding to what Marie Henderson said, so many times students don't see what they bring is a richness and a whole pot of gold. And they sometimes think, oh, I have to put that aside instead of bringing it with them, be it language, be it history, whatever. And I think that's where the teacher, if they know more about the background, can bring it in more as a source of richness instead of keeping it out of the classroom. I mean, consider the kids who come in with Spanish. That's already a great building block to move forward instead of thinking, oh, like you said, that it's incorrect. It's a start. It's a fantastic start.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
So I think we're kind of out of time. I'm sorry. I tried to, I thought maybe we could just end with the poll. So this is a slightly different one. I'm just trying some different strategies. If you wanted to go to slido.com. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Thank you.